Well, hello everyone. Today is the first of two 2024 wrap-up videos. Today I'm going to talk about the 7 new favorites. Well, it's actually 12 books, but you'll see 7 chapters below. The 7 to 12 new favorites that I read in 2024, and I'm really excited to do so. But next week is the big one, the 4th annual Red Fury Book Awards. I hope to have that out next Sunday. I'm probably going to make this as a premiere so that we can hang out in the chat and talk as it's being debuted for the first time. I'm really excited. I can't believe I've been on BookTube 4 years, and this is the 4th time I'm doing the Furies. And I'm very excited about the books that I'm going to present, and there's some special guests on that video. I have some special guest presenters that are actually going to give out some of the awards instead of me, so I'm really excited for that. So today I'm talking about some of my favorites. Next week I'll be awarding my favorite book series, my favorite author of the year, my favorite book I read in the year, and many more. So look for that video in a week. Let's roll the intro and talk about my new favorites from 2024. So these new favorites are not ranked. I'm going to lay them out kind of chronologically as to when I read them during the year, except for a few that I'm going to group together by author, because it just makes sense, especially if things are in a book series, to talk about them together. But the first ones I'm going to talk about, this is a book, and it became 3 books that actually changed the trajectory of my reading for the entire year. And these are the Coughlin novels by Dennis Lehane. I read the first one, The Given Day, in January. It was one of my first books that I read this year, and it became one of my best books that I read not only in 2024, but one of my favorite books I've ever read. It made my top 50 books that I'm currently counting down. I promise to get back to that soon. But I've really enjoyed Dennis Lehane before, but this one is next level for him. So I had planned on reading the other 2 Coughlin novels in February and March, but I was so enamored by the first book, I read them all in January. The second book is called Live by Night, and the third book is called World Gone By. And these are the Coughlin novels. It's not necessarily a trilogy, but they are linked by characters. The first book is historical fiction, not crime fiction, which is Dennis Lehane's calling card. It's a work of historical fiction. It follows a character named Danny Coughlin that is a cop in 1918 in Boston, and it deals with all the societal ramifications, the things that are going on at the time in America, and using Boston as kind of a microcosm of what's going on in the country. Just a lot of upheaval from a societal standpoint. That's something that Lehane does extremely well in all of his works, but none better than in The Given Day. It's a historical fiction masterpiece. It is the thickest of all of Lehane's books and could be read by itself. It's a fantastic work of storytelling. The second and third books don't follow Danny. They follow Danny's brother Joe, his younger brother, who is not a cop but is a criminal. And in Live by Night, we get Joe's kind of coming-of-age story as he gets embroiled in this family of organized crime, and you see him rise through the ranks of this mob family. Starts in Boston, ends up in Tampa. It's a remarkable book. It's probably of the 3, maybe the lowest of the 3. If I had to rank the 3 books, it's not quite up to the other 2. However, it's a great crime thriller. It has a stupendous ending that will probably surprise you and definitely will make you think about it long after you finish the book. And the third book is World Gone By, and this follows Joe Coughlin as well, and it's set many years after Live by Night. And you see that he's kind of dealing with the ramifications and just dealing with the repercussions of living his life as a gangster in an organized mob family. So it's a really, really great book. It's the book that Stephen King called what did he call it? The greatest gangster novel since The Godfather. And I won't disagree with him. These 3 books changed my reading for 2024. I fell back in love with this author. I read his newest book, Small Mercies, and then I reread 8 more of his books so that I could do this big Dennis Lehane video, which I did at the end of the year. I called it, Can Crime Fiction Be Literary? Short answer, yes. Long answer, go watch that video if you like what I do here. That's the video that by far I've put the most time into in anything I've done in my 4 years here on YouTube, and it's one of those high effort videos. It's not perfect, but I'm really happy with most of the aspects of that series, of the series of things I talk about in that video. So check that out if you haven't already. But I also did another video right after I read these 3 books talking about why you should read the Coughlin novels of Dennis Lehane, because you should. They are fantastic. Pound for pound, it's probably the best part of Lehane's output as an author. In February, I read the final book in this omnibus collection of the books of Elric of Melniboné. The final book in this is called Stormbringer by Michael Moorcock. These Elric novels are early, kind of traditional fantasy, start in the 60s. He's still writing them today. He put one out a couple years ago, and they've gone throughout all the years. Stormbringer was actually the first novel that he wrote. However, some of the shorter stories that he wrote following this character eventually made its way into some of the novels. Because a lot of the earlier novels were kind of those, I think they're called put-up novels, where they take different short stories and try to kind of link them together to make a novel. And some of the early Elric novels are like that. But for me, Stormbringer was the pinnacle of it all and became a favorite. It also made my top 50. And it was remarkable just seeing how this first novel just played upon a lot of the things that he ended up writing later and putting into the other novels. It's a character that will just be imprinted upon your brain, and you can see why so many authors after Elric of Melniboné just were inspired by this character, who's not quite a hero. You can call him an anti-hero is probably a good description of him. Very, very different kind of central protagonist in fantasy. Very, very groundbreaking author and very, very groundbreaking series and character, these Elric novels. Now, I do not recommend reading all 8 of them, however. There are 8 in these first 2 omnibus collections. You can see the first one over my shoulder over here. And I think the best thing to do with Elric is actually to read the first 6 novels that were published by Daw back in the day. The 6th one is Stormbringer, and you're saying, why should I read 6 just to read that novel? Well, these are all shorts. Those 6 novels are easily probably 300-400 pages shorter than like Brandon Sanderson's latest book. So you can read all of these very, very quickly. They're all around 150 to 200 pages. And the last 2 books for me were easily the best of Michael Moorcock's Elric books, The Bane of the Black Sword, and then a new favorite of mine, Stormbringer. In May, I read a new classic novel that became a favorite classic novel of mine, and you can't tell what it is when I hold it up. This is The Three Musketeers by Alexander Dumas, and this is a gorgeous Easton Press edition that I found for a pretty reasonable price, and I love this edition, except Easton Price doesn't tell you Easton Price. Easton Press doesn't tell you who the translator is. I mean, seriously? Come on, Easton Press, do better. Someone asked me who translated my version. I have no idea. Anyway, I really enjoyed this book. There's 2 things that I loved about The Three Musketeers. First of all, the first thing that I loved about it is how different it felt from my other book by Dumas that I've really loved, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo. I mentioned my top 50. I've counted down to 30. I haven't talked about that book yet, but I will. It's pretty high on that list. It's one of my favorite classics. It's one of my favorite books of all time. And I thought it was great because this felt very different. A lot of times with the 19th century novelists, I think a lot of times they feel very similar to me. Like it's written by the same person and each book kind of feels, just has a similar feel. And I felt this felt so different than The Count of Monte Cristo. The other thing that I really loved about this book is, unlike some other works from the time, this didn't feel like it had chapter after chapter that didn't need to be there. Not to disparage a couple of my favorites, but to give examples, Charles Dickens, Victor Hugo. Most of their books, when I read their books, there are chapters where I say, yeah, that should have been cut. Or that could have been cut with no detriment to the overall story whatsoever. And it makes sense because at the time, most of these books were serialized. So more installments equals more money for the author. So it's understandable that there's a little bit of fat in a lot of these stories. But I didn't feel that here. I felt that the story just kept moving forward. It jumps point of view quite a bit. It tells a lot of different stories of the Three Musketeers plus one more, which I guess you could say is the fourth Musketeer. But I enjoyed the story. It had a very different tone than The Count of Monte Cristo. I don't think it reached the highs of that, but just the more I think about this book, the more I enjoy just reading it. So I will be reading more Dumas at some point in the future. Not anytime soon that I have scheduled, but I do want to read more of this author to see if maybe a third book has just a different kind of feel and a different kind of tone as the first two. But a new favorite classic and a new favorite from 2024 is The Three Musketeers by Alexander Dumas. A new favorite that I read in June is Waylander by David Gemmell. Now, I had read Legend by David Gemmell, loved it, thought, oh, this author's going to be amazing for me. And then the second book that's published in the Drenai saga, frankly, wasn't very good. I didn't enjoy it a whole lot. It didn't really do anything interesting. It kind of rehashed some of the themes in the first book. So I was a little hesitant going forward, thinking, well, maybe he's a one and done. Well, he's not, because Waylander, I've now read 5 books by David Gemmell. This is the third of the 5 books that I've read in the Drenai saga. This is my favorite of all of them. This is so good, even better than Legend. The things I like about this kind of heroic fantasy that David Gemmell paints is he gives you these larger-than-life characters, huge events that are going on in the world, and he grounds it by just giving you very real and very relatable characters. The book here, the title character Waylander, is on kind of a journey of self-discovery here as he discovers who he is, what he believes in. And there's many times in this book where it's obvious he doesn't know, or someone says, you know, you're this kind of person, you've done this in your life, why are you doing this? And he has to answer, I don't know. And I found it just fascinating seeing this character in this very short book go through this journey of self-discovery while these larger-than-life events are going on that have huge repercussions in the entire world. And I just gravitated to it and loved it. And I was so happy when I got further into the Drenai saga that the 5th book is actually a sequel to this one. So I was happy to revisit this character. But of all of them, this is by far my favorite of the Drenai books so far. And I'll definitely be reading more of these next year. So Waylander by David Gemmell, fantastic. You could actually start with this because it is a standalone of sorts, as most of these Drenai books are. In July, I read another book, which was an installment from a book series that, for me, elevated the book series, and it's my favorite so far. That is the 7th book of the Dresden Files, Deadbeat. Now, I knew going in that it's kind of a rocky start to this book series. The first book, for me, was okay. The second book, frankly, was lousy. And the third book was good, so I read on, and then it kind of went up and down between books 3 through 6, and then Deadbeat. It all came together. The way that Butcher had all of his world-building elements kind of finally came together in this book. You had some great new characters, some great old characters. I had been getting comfortable with Harry Dresden, who I don't always like, but I like him more than I dislike him. I thought he was great in this book. I love the things that he discovered about himself in this book. It had some huge moments. There's one moment in here that I literally cheered out loud, and I was on a public bus. But it's the false peak from what Jake and Kyle tell me about the Dresden Files, that it kind of builds up to 7 and then it kind of meanders again until we get to book 11 or 12, I think. But I'm all in with this series. It's the first one that I can say, yes, I'm so excited about the Dresden Files going forward. In fact, as I'm filming this, I've been listening to the 8th book, Proven Guilty, on audio. The audiobooks are excellent. I've done 3 of the 7 so far on audio, and I'm thoroughly enjoying that experience, and I look forward to maybe getting caught up on Dresden this year. We'll see. I probably will do at least 3 or 4 of them, if not all of them, if I get really excited about the series. But I was really excited about Deadbeat, and it is a new favorite of mine. All right, the next one is 2 books by Steven Erikson from the Malazan Book of the Fallen. The 3rd book, Memories of Ice, I read in July. Absolutely loved it. That's why I'm talking about it, of course. And November, I read House of Chains, the 4th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. These are maybe the most unexpected ones on this list because I did at one point DNF this series, and I'm so glad I came back. Memories of Ice has one of the biggest and most impactful endings of any fantasy book I've ever read. It was remarkable, not just the big action sequences, but the emotional gut punches that Erikson just continues to hit you with. I remember shooting my vlog for this, and I'm shooting the vlog, and I just finished the book like within the last hour, and at one point I'm just kind of staring into the distance because I'm trying to process just what Erikson did to me on an emotional level. Incredible storytelling. I was so excited for the series going forward from there. And then I picked up House of Chains in November, and I might have liked this one better. House of Chains didn't have the huge ending of Memories of Ice. It didn't have the big gut punches from an emotional standpoint. But it was so consistently good from beginning to end. At the beginning of the book, you're introduced to a new character, and for the first time in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which is famous for how often it jumps point of view, you stick with one character for the first quarter of the book. And what's even more remarkable is that I liked the character, and then I didn't like the character at all. And by the end, that character is my favorite in the entire series right now. So I'm so excited going forward reading Malazan. These two are new favorites. I think Deadhouse Gates was a new favorite last year, which means I'm a, what do you call yourselves, Malazan fans? Malaz heads, Malazites, I don't know. Whatever it is, I'm all on board for it. I have 4 Malazan books planned for 2025. I'm going to read Midnight Tides in March. I'm going to read Knight of Knives by Ian C. Esselmont in June, The Bone Hunters in July, and then Reaper's Gale in November. And I'm so excited to be back on board with this series. It's still a challenging read, but I find that the payoff is worth the effort. So call me a Malazan fan at this point. And last, but certainly not least, definitely not least, probably save the best for last, I have to talk about Guy Gavriel Kay. There are times I wonder if Guy Gavriel Kay has become my favorite author, full stop, because he is the author who occupies my thoughts more than any other right now. Now, I read 5 works by Kay, and I thought it'd be overkill if I talked about all 5 of them on this video, so I'm just going to highlight 3 of them. In August and September, I read the 2 books of the Sarantium Mosaic, Sailing to Sarantium, and Lord of Emperors. So those 2, and then in November I read A Brightness Long Ago. So I already did a video on why you should read these 2 books, Sailing to Sarantium, Lord of Emperors, but just a quick, if you haven't seen that video and just want a quick summation, it's essentially one big novel, but it is a duology that is inspired by the 5th century Byzantine Empire, and this tells the story of huge events and the repercussions of not just the Sarantium Empire, but kind of the entire known world at the time. And the remarkable thing about this is that Kay chooses to tell most of the story not from the perspective of the big players going on, but the small people that, frankly, history won't really remember. The main character, the central protagonist of this duology, is an artisan. He's a mosaicist. You get a lot of perspectives from him, but you also get the story told from the perspective of a dancer, a cook, an assistant cook, chariot racers, a doctor, and all of these people that the history books won't talk about. And for me, it grounds the story. It makes it feel a lot more real, and it makes it feel, for me, that I connect on it on a more human level when you're not dealing with these huge historic type figures. You're just dealing with realistic people. And the ending, I wept. I found it so beautiful. He tied it all together. When you get to the end, you realize that the whole story had come full circle in such a meaningful way. Easily, probably my best book series of the year. Wait for the Red Fury Book Awards, you'll find out for that. And then Lord of Emperors is definitely a finalist for my book of the year. Fantastic duology. My highest recommendation. Also, my highest recommendation is A Brightness Long Ago, which I read in November. This is the book that made me realize the biggest thing that I love about this author is his narrative voice. He just makes it feel like when I read, and this is the biggest reason why I'm wrestling with the question, is Guy Gavriel Kay my favorite author, period. When I read a work by this author, I feel like I'm reading something important. It's not just a story. And that's not to say that all the beautiful books behind me and the ones I talked about are not important, but these feel important to me. And it's that strong narrative voice from a historical perspective that just lends the weight, the gravitas to the story that I just connect with it so fundamentally. This book is set in the same world as the Sarantium Mosaic. It's set a couple centuries later, and it's in a part of the world that is based off of Italian city-states with rival mercenary companies. And it has some of his best characters. And again, he doesn't always tell it from the big movers and shakers in history. He often tells it from some of the side characters. And it's such a different kind of fantasy, and I just love it. I got to the end of this book, and I just said simply, that was beautiful. And that's what I feel about this book and this author. So hey, that was 2024, some of my new favorites. If you've read any of these, I would love to talk with you in the comments section below. But please label any spoilers in case anyone's inspired to read these books from this video. And I'd also love to hear, what are some new favorites that you read in 2024? Let me know that in the comments section as well. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter, Goodreads, and the Fireside Discord. I'd love to interact with you there. As always, thank you for watching. Till next time, goodbye.